So viruses are actually a family of viruses. And so there are about 7 different types of coronaviruses. And they are very, very different from your common flu, H1N1, or influenza. And so you may have heard that the 3 most common types of coronaviruses are actually COVID-19, which is the situation we're dealing with right now, as well as 2 other viruses called SARS that affected Hong Kong, and also a 3rd one called MERS that affected the Arabian Peninsula about 20 years ago. And so COVID-19 is very different from influenza. And why is that? Well, it's because it is much more virulent and it is much more dangerous or lethal compared to influenza. So to give you an idea, the mortality or death rate from influenza is less than 1%. It's about 0.01%. But the mortality rate from COVID-19 is almost reaching about 2%.
And so just help us get our minds around the difference between 0.1% and 2%, because the numbers don't make much sense to us because we can't scale them and we can't grasp them as it unfolds. So just mathematically, what's the difference in terms of population and scale?
Yeah. So to put it in layman's terms, COVID-19 is about 10 times more lethal than H1N1 or influenza, your common flu. And it spreads also, it can spread actually very, very fast, which is what we're seeing over the course of the past few weeks. So another very concerning feature about COVID-19 is that it can cause quite significant complications. And so the most commonest symptoms for COVID-19 include 3 things. The first is fever, and fever occurs about 70% of the time. The second one is cough, which occurs about 50% of the time. And the third one is shortness of breath, which occurs about 30% of the time. So the people who are at most highest risk for COVID-19 are really in 2 different demographics. The first is those who are over the age of 60, and the second is also people who are less than, or children who are less than 5 years old, as well as this third group of people who have pre-existing medical conditions. So pre-existing medical conditions that puts you at higher risk for COVID-19 includes things like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, lung disease, kidney failure, as well as those who are immunosuppressed. And immunosuppressed people are really forced into 2 groups. The first who have had transplantation who are on immunosuppressive medications, and the second group who have HIV and AIDS. So those are the highest risk groups.
But again, it just feels like to most, it feels like we're getting all stirred up and we're mobilizing in an emergency mode for something that practically isn't, in terms of how we may experience it, feeling so different than the flu. And so what you just said was pretty potent. I mean, it's 10 times more deadly. That's incredible. You said it's more virulent. Yeah. And so help us understand what it means for something to be more virulent. And are you saying that it spreads faster and spreads farther than the flu? How does that work?
Yeah. Samuel, do you want to chime in on this question?
So for virulence, we can discuss the different aspects of the virus, and we can put them all into this category where we say, how does this virus propagate, as well as how does this virus react whenever we're infected.
So wait, how does it propagate? I mean, how does it spread? Mm-hmm. But then how does it react? That's a new term.
So that term is a bit informal. So when we say that it reacts, we're mostly just saying how it enters the system, how it interacts with our body, how it replicates within our body, and then once again how it reaches out into surfaces, into the air around us, and onto other areas that we might contaminate.
So point of reference. We haven't really hit this yet. How does the flu transmit? Just so we can have a framework or a point of reference to work from.
Yeah, excellent question. So,
wow.
You're welcome. So I'm going to make 2 points here about how COVID-19 transmits and compare them with the flu. So both the flu and COVID-19, so the flu is influenza and COVID-19 is the coronavirus, they both affect the respiratory system. So that's the reason why most of the symptoms that you have, if you do contract COVID-19, are respiratory: fever, shortness of breath, and cough, as well as sometimes sputum production as well. And respiratory infections always spread really by droplets, okay? So if I was to cough or sneeze, those droplets actually make our way into other people. And so for some reason, COVID-19 appears to affect the lining of the nose and nasal tract a lot more than the oral pharynx. So you can get COVID-19 through the mouth and through the nose, but it appears to be more sensitive, or at least the lining of the respiratory tract appears to be more sensitive to COVID-19. What we also know from recent data from China and other countries is that COVID-19 also appears in stools. So, for example, there are a number of medical viruses that can be transmitted through contact with feces or stool, such as hepatitis, for example. And so we are also finding that COVID-19 does appear in human stools as well, which is another mode of transmission.
But again, that sounds like the flu. And so what about COVID-19 should make me more sober and more engaged in the protocols than the common flu? Because again, they sound the same in terms of how you're describing transmission.
Yeah, another excellent question. So I'm gonna have actually ask Samuel to talk a bit about the rate of spread of COVID-19 and how fast it spreads. Okay, but before then, I would say that. So you and I, if we are less than the age of 60, and if we're young and healthy, and we get COVID-19, then it's likely that we won't experience any significant complications. But however, higher risk groups, so patients who are over the age of 60, those with pre-existing medical conditions, if they do get COVID-19, they have a much more higher rate of complications. So to give you an idea, a staggering 18% of patients who have COVID-19 that develop symptoms actually develop very severe symptoms. And about 5% of patients actually require intensive care admission, and about up to 2%, which is 10 times more than influenza, actually die of this condition. And so 2% may sound very little, but it's actually huge. If you have 10 million people who develop COVID-19, that's a lot of people who can be at risk from dying from this condition, which is why it needs to be at the forefront of our preventative measures and the forefront of our prayers.
So yeah, the dance that we're dancing here is we don't want to be fear-driven, and we don't want to use fear as a motivator, but we want to be sober about the possibilities. So when you say 10 million, and the possibility of 200,000, right? Or am I getting my math wrong? In terms of the number of potential fatalities, is that within the realm of possibility, and therefore we should be concerned, or is that alarmist talk?
Yeah. So that was just a random figure just to give an idea. So right now, probably about 170,000 people may have COVID-19. And so that's a lot of people. And it can spread very, very fast. But thankfully, the measures that we're putting into place right now have the potential to really bring this number to a halt and also bring us through this next season.
So in that, I want to talk a little bit about Hong Kong, talk about Singapore, talk about Taiwan. Because they went through SARS, they might not have done well in the SARS outbreak, but it taught them as a nation and as a city how to respond now that COVID-19 had an outbreak. And so it's like the people knew what to do. And so they sprang into action quickly. They didn't resist the social protocols. They actually engaged in them now. And so it seems like, compared to Italy, it seems like you go to Hong Kong, very densely populated area, but it seems like they're able to do a measure of life with normalcy, but still observing the protocols. And so because of that, I mean, you threw the number. How many did you just say for America it might have it?
So in America, we have about over 1,700 cases.
So we have 1,700 cases. Hong Kong, which has been dealing with this longer, has open borders with China and far more risk than we do, has 100 cases. Is that an accurate number?
I'm not sure exactly how many Hong Kong does. Do you know?
It's approximately rounded to that figure.
And Taiwan, who's also been dealing with this longer, they have 45 cases and 1 death. And so if that's correct, then there's some That would be illustrative right there of the difference we can make. Now, they took early action, but that's illustrative of the actions that we take now and how that can impact the numbers you're talking about, even if it doesn't feel like we're making an impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, yeah. So preventative measures really do work, and they really can bring us through this situation and actually put people in a safe places.
Now, the experts, the crew that you're connected with, which is correct, right? You're connected to a team that's working actively on this.
Yeah, so I'm part of Harvard Medical School and the Massachusetts General Hospital, and we have an incredible team. So at Harvard, this institution is one that has led a lot of major crises, such as the Ebola crisis and other crises. And this is one where we have an incredible team of physicians and scientists who work together collaboratively. So I'm one of the attending physicians there who will also be seeing patients who have COVID-19.
So the reason I ask is it seems like that the experts have been onto this from the beginning. In other words, when the outbreak first started in China, the experts were immediately alarmed and beginning to kind of sound the warning bells. But it didn't seem like anybody in the West really listened until things went bad in Italy. It seems like once things kind of went the other way in Italy, and Italy shut itself down at great economic cost, that seemed to get the attention of the West in a different way. Does that seem like that to you?
Yeah, I think Samuel can comment on that as well.
So when we talk about different populations, especially with relation to the U.S.,
a little closer.
It is a bit of a wake-up call because, especially with relation to Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, other areas that have been affected by SARS previously, there's always a weak governmental response to it initially. And when it does come into effect, the people internalize how to have social etiquette, how to have proper responses, how to deal with this as a community, as a collective, so that even if the government response falls over, that they can still function as a society. So that's one of the stages that we're going through right now, that even though our government response is ramping up, we still need to have our obligations and our responsibilities as a community to work through this time and to be diligent about what we do with ourselves and with others.
So that's a huge point. I know for the media team, I know we're going to do the slide presentation in a minute, but if you could sneak ahead for me and put up that Michigan curve slide, it's really helpful to look at to get a reference point for what we're talking about, if you can find that quickly. Because the issue that Samuel's raising is the issue that's in part fueling our urgency. Here it is. And so what we're about to walk through as it relates to, we're going to talk a lot about social distancing. We're going to talk about hand washing. We're going to talk about the space that we're going to need to make for one another going forward in different large gatherings that can't be large anymore by law. And so, wait, let's put that back up. Sorry. So now, take a look at that first bell curve. Samuel, comment on the first bell curve.
So these two curves are really what separate how fast we act and what we do in our actions. Now, what you can see is that there's a dotted line here that says how many very sick people hospitals can treat. So that's our threshold. That's the very limit between people who get good and fair treatment at the hospitals and those who go to hospitals and cannot get enough treatment, cannot get enough supplies, don't have beds. And this is the major difference. Those above the threshold, each and every one level that goes above, it's one new case that cannot be treated even though they go to the hospital.
So the stakes of not taking these protocols seriously is the first bell curve. That there could be, even though there seems to be only a small number of cases, there can be a fast exponential multiplication of this virus that creates a real strain on the medical system.
Yes.
So the goal then is to engage in these protocols to do what's called flattening the curve, to actually make it so that our healthcare system can bear the crisis as it relates to the number of sick people. So I just want to be real clear on this. Our goal, as we're talking through this, again, it's not to stoke fear as a motivator. Our goal is to inform and educate so we understand the stakes, but it's not so that we're going to go into self-protection mode. I want to be real clear about something. I don't want to talk necessarily about you. I want to talk about me. I'm not afraid of getting sick. And I actually would be in a slightly more risk factor demographic because I've got asthma, I've got respiratory issues, I've got a history of pneumonia. And so if anybody should be nervous about this virus, it should be me. Of course, I'm nervous for my mom, who also is in that same, she's older, but she has the similar respiratory issues. But here's the thing. I have the Holy Spirit of fire inside of me. I have the fire of a billion suns on the inside called God, the Holy Spirit. I'm not worrying and fearful for myself, hoping to not get sick in case something bad happens to me. I signed up for something bad to happen to me. I'm in. My life is the Lord's. My life is not my own. So we're not trying to just equip you to protect yourselves. That's not really our foremost concern here. Our foremost concern is threefold. Number one, we are wanting to really care for the well-being of the whole community. We have to shift our thinking from individualistic to collective, and we got to think of ourselves as a team and a family in terms of how we take this on. And so what we want to aim for is not getting sick ourselves and not being a transmitter or a carrier, because we got to talk about asymptomatic in a second. We don't want to be a carrier of something that, while it might not impact us, in other words, we can have it, not have symptoms, or we can have it and the impact isn't that serious, but the problem is it could be serious for somebody else in this community. And so we've got to think about the folks in the high risk factor demographic. We got to think about our elderly. We have to think about the folks with respiratory issues, children under 5. We have to think about one another in a different way, and we have to fight for one another in a different way. But when you see the Michigan bell curve, the other thing that you got to do is you have to think about not just your corporate or communal responsibility, you have to think about your civic responsibility. In other words, we want to take it personally. If we're going to pray for Kansas City night and day for 20 years, we got to take it personally in terms of doing our part to not fill the hospital beds of the ICUs and to overload or max out the hospitals in ways that make it hard for others in that same hospital to get care. You talked about the ICUs in the region, and how many beds are we talking about?
Yeah, so we have about several hospitals that surround our Ihop area. And each local hospital may have about 10 to 20 medical ICU beds. So that's really not very much. And if 5% of thousands of people actually develop COVID-19 in our community, we will very quickly exhaust our ICU bed numbers.
So it's not a matter of faith versus civic responsibility. We can do faith all day long because we're dependent on the Lord. He is our protection. He is our refuge. We are leaning into Him individually, but collectively we do responsibility. We can do faith and responsibility. And so what I'm nervous about, we're going to talk through all these protocols, and then we got the rebellious handshaker in the name of faith. It's going to just shake hands to make a point and show us how spiritual and radical they are. That's not helpful. We want to really serve one another with humility and not prove how faith-filled we are. We want to do faith and confidence as it relates to our friends, our family, staying virus-free. And we want to pray, and we want to pray for healing. But we also want to be responsible in how we serve and care for one another. You can do both. So I want to bring you guys out. I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that we can cover in the practicals, but we can let those unfold. We got to talk about hand washing still. It's quite critical. And we got to define social distancing.
We're going to have a little presentation for just a few moments, and then we'll make a couple comments and then have an open Q&A, ask anything that you want.
Wonderful. So I'm going to introduce Joseph Taylor. He's one of our executive leadership team member. He is over many areas on our base, especially over the staff, the human resource. And he has spent a number of days researching up to speed all the rapidly developing situation, and he's going to give us a systematic presentation on our initial response, what we're putting together to our spiritual family right now. Joseph, thank you.
Good. Well, I'll say, first of all, I'm so grateful that we have this type of resource and experts. This blows my mind that we can pull on this. And even these guys and several other physicians and medical doctors all over the nation have been speaking into our response. So we're not just, going on the internet and reading news and saying, oh, this sounds good. We're talking to medical experts. We're getting their input. They've deeply informed how we're responding, and I think you'll see that.
And I think it's an incredible blessing, Dr. Ken, that you are here. You're in the middle of this group with Harvard and other universities, top level, and he's getting updated info every 6 hours. Yeah. And he's living here and sharing it with us and a part of our community. This is remarkable. What a blessing.
Okay, so let's pull that slide back up. This slide here, there we go. Many of you have seen this. If you haven't, this is our official Ihopkc coronavirus response system, which, as Dave referenced earlier, we've quickly escalated. As of last Friday, I was introducing that we were at that top level, the standard precautions. And, hey, if you're sick, stay home, wash your hands, etc. We've already progressed where, as of today, we're at the alert level, the yellow alert level, just because of how quickly things have progressed in the nation. So we're going to go through that in more detail, but if you're not familiar with this, we'll be making this available so that you can all be informed about
It's available where? On our website?
On our website. We'll be just distributing it in many
Well,
places.
I want to say it a little stronger. I would say last week at our third service, you presented these protocols, and you were trying to get us into watch level 1, but I saw people hugging and shaking hands all week. In other words, we presented it, we were aware of the crisis, but I don't know that we took it all that seriously. And while we were trying to figure out if this was real and if we should take that presentation seriously, boom, we ramped up to alert level 2, just overnight.
And we're alert level 2 because the president and his cabinet said we are, and because our governor said we are, and because our mayor said we are. We didn't get to vote on that. It went up all over the earth, all over America, and in many places in the earth, rather.
Yep. And so we'll be going through this. We'll be making it available. We want you to be able to know how you can engage in this process. That's actually probably the biggest point I'm going to say, and all of us will say again and again, is we can roll this out, we can inform you, even like what Dave just referenced, but if you don't own it along with us, it means nothing. We need you to come alongside us. We need you to own it for yourself and for the community and for the city to say, hey, I will take responsibility to make this work. If we don't all do it together, it will not work. It takes one infection in our community to spread rapidly. Okay, so just for context.
Wait, say that again. It takes one
person infected
to go down the way, come back, hug a bunch of folks, and all of a sudden hundreds of people have it. But again, the fear isn't where we're at.
No, we're not trying to do fear.
Responsible because we're in a city that we're serving, that we're here, and we want to be helpful to the city.
I'll say it this way. It's not fear, but we also want to paint reality. So here's an example from Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt had their spring break. There was a bunch of students who were scheduled to go to Europe. Europe is a known hot zone right now for COVID-19. A bunch of them canceled because they realized there was a risk. A few of them said, no, we're doing it anyway. They went, they got infected, they came back, and within a day, Vanderbilt shut down the school.
The entire university of thousands.
Yes, gone. Well, not gone, but shut down. It's gone. Okay, so we'll move on. Let's go on to the next slide. Obviously, I won't even spend much time on this. This is just showing, many of you are aware of this, everyone who's been reading the news, just the extreme nature of what we're dealing with here. We're talking about the NBA shutdown, the New York City Marathon, so many different things. This is just a tiny snapshot.
I'm mildly belaboring the point, but I want to.
Yes.
Just what's not on there is that the Big 12 tournament was canceled in Kansas City. And the moment that was shut down, that cost the city millions and millions of dollars. Businesses, restaurants, hotels, the number of people, just ushers and concessions, the number of people that were not getting paid because of that decision. And so that's where we've got to, in my opinion, in this moment of international crisis, put aside the conspiracy theory fear and just look at the financial loss that's being incurred at outrageous levels by organizations that aren't known for wanting to take financial losses. They don't do that because there's a national conspiracy to inflate the hype. They do it because something real is moving very fast and we need to put a stop to it.
Okay, let's look at these next two slides. This is even just trying to paint, and both of you, I'd love for you to comment on anything you see here. Just help us to flesh this out. But these are really painting the picture of what we were describing earlier. Obviously, this specific slide is excluding China. If China were included on there, it'd be right off the chart. But these are the top nations, the top 3 nations here that are currently leading the world in infections. What you'll notice down in the corner, we'll go here in a minute, is kind of a jumble of lines of the rest of the world. We'll zoom in on that for a second. But look at Italy. And Dave, you already mentioned this. I want to pull this apart just a little bit more. But Italy versus Hong Kong. So here's Italy spiking, and then Hong Kong, which is literally how many miles from mainland China? I mean, rounded kilometers, whatever you would. It's close, right?
0?
It's there. It is China. But from mainland, I'm saying. It's there. There we go. The point being, they have what, less than 100? So I just want to get more on that, because I think that chart just really paints it really well.
Describe that, yeah.
So specifically, let's talk about the case for Italy, because that's one of the most prominent at this point in time. Italy has some of the best healthcare systems that we can think of, at least for that region, especially in the EU. It's not that they didn't have the resources, the equipment, the time to spend on this. It's because they couldn't handle the sheer capacity of everyone and every single case of COVID-19, on top of all the seasonal flu, on top of all the endemic diseases that are piling on the healthcare system, swamping each and every hospital that they need to go to, which is why they are seeing this rise in cases, because they can't handle the sheer magnitude.
Okay, so let's go on to this next slide. This is just showing, I'll skip past this pretty quickly, but this is just showing, so we saw all the
Wait,
rest
I
of...
don't think we got the full point you were making, did he?
Yeah, pull it apart more.
The point is Hong Kong is far more people, far more densely populated, far closer to the epicenter of the problem.
Right.
But the numbers are far less because they're embracing the social etiquette, the social disciplines, where Italy, like America, has a tremendous healthcare system, but being the Western, we thought, well, hey, we're okay. We're doing the same attitude here as they did. So the numbers are spiking, though Hong Kong has far more dense population and far more vulnerability, but far less exposure because the society is embracing it. That's the point you want to make. And Italy is the example, like America, we don't want to be, the casual attitude towards it.
They kept packing stadiums.
Which I had 4 days ago.
That is true. They kept packing stadiums for soccer matches, and they wanted to keep the tourism going. And because they didn't quite think that it could
Rome
happen
is
to them.
the, whatchamacallit, tourist center of the earth, I think.
Italy's the #1 tourist nation in the world.
And
So that's a
the
significant
time when they were
income.
shutting on the Venice Festival, which is a huge deal, was also on. So basically, it's like muscle memory. When you have not encountered that activity before, your muscle hasn't had the memory to actually know how to respond to it. Is a very strange phenomenon. For most Western people, seasonal flu is coming and going all the time. In America, you hear that very often. 45 million people go through seasonal flu every year.
So we don't even pay attention to it.
Yeah,
at least
nobody,
I
it's
don't.
not in the news. Nobody talks about it. It's 30 to 60,000 people die every year out of 45 million people who are infected every year. So what's the big deal, right? So go about your life, living everything as it is. But the Hong Kong people, because of the practice run of the severity of SARS in 2002, they realized that if they don't change the way they live and adopt some serious social etiquette, then they will have the death toll that they faced in 2002. So people take personal responsibility, not waiting for the government. They learn it, each person take responsibility. So when the second round came, H1N1 2019, they did better. COVID-19, they are well prepared. They are generational knowledge that's passed down from grandma to parents to kids. They all know what to do. So for us as Westerners, We don't have the muscle memory. We have to learn this. This is going to be sounding.
This is why it's weird to us. Like
It's
this
weird. It's
whole
strange.
thing. I'm just, in the last week, I'm going like, what? We don't have to do this. But the social etiquette is the word that Daniel Lim is using. It means the disciplines of our behavior that are inconvenient and somewhat foreign to us.
Good. Yeah, let's go back to that slide that Dave's already referenced. It's the Michigan curve slide. There we go. The thing that we're going to be referencing a lot here is what they're really highlighting from this is if we as a community are willing to take the intervention seriously, we have the ability to do this.
You're talking about the U.S. community, not just our local ministry here.
Both.
We're talking about America.
Yep. Both, yes. And so we'll be, in a few minutes, talking about some very specific interventions or changes to our lifestyle, changes to the way we're going to run as an organization and as a missions base, as a ministry.
There's 3 or 4 big changes coming.
2 big ones and a few small ones, but 2 big ones. And we want to talk about that. We want to make sure that you're understanding the why. We don't just dump the changes on you. It's important to us that you understand that. But let me actually, let's go ahead. Let's go to this next one just to reference it. So the next one on the deaths by age. And then I'll come back to the curve. So this one is just helpful really to, again, illustrate what Dr. Ken was referencing earlier, that it's not like your average flu. The orange bars are showing the fatality rate by age. So as you get into the older populations, we're seeing this isn't just 2%. This is upwards of 15% for someone who's 80 or older. That's just mind-boggling to me, the idea that there's a certain part of our population here in Kansas City, here in our community, that is that susceptible. And we care about them. We want to make sure that we're keeping it safe for everybody. Okay, let's go on to this next slide. I'm going to actually take time and read this. I don't know. Yeah, you can read that. This is referencing that curve that we were looking at on the Michigan slide. In the natural course of infectious spread, there's a sharp increase, a peak, and a decrease. China appears to be in the downward part of the curve. Italy, Iran, and South Korea are still in the upward trajectory. We now have the opportunity to flatten the curve. So you saw the huge spike that Dave referenced earlier. We have the opportunity to drive that down if we take this seriously. Flattening the curve is essentially introducing interventions such as social distancing, which we'll talk about more in a minute, hand washing, should be pretty easy, lockdowns to reduce the potential spread of infection. Let's skip down to the bottom. Measures that we can voluntarily engage in, such as social distancing and hand washing, can have a tremendous impact, potentially negating the need for a more aggressive measure such as lockdown. What we're trying to avoid is lockdown, i.e. where the government comes in and says...
Yeah, if we get a few people infected in our community, they will, if they ascertain it's dangerous, which they probably would, they will lock the doors of the ministries in the buildings. Though our number one care is the well-being of our people and the city, but that is real. And we don't want to overload the hospitals either, because that's, the civic irresponsibility, but they will really lock the doors with a very small number. So whatever level you're motivated by of the well-being, the civic responsibility, the lockdown, they're all very real.
Let's skip ahead to the slide on asymptomatic transmission. This has been mentioned, but I think it just really is worth the repetition on. So asymptomatic transmission, big word, basically it means you can actually transmit the virus without even having symptoms. I'm here in the room, I actually have it. I don't feel sick. Theoretically, this is an example.
Play acting right now.
Sorry. Dude, get out of the room right now.
Just social distance yourself from me.
There we go. Okay, hypothetically, I'm here in the room and I have it, but I feel fine, we're good. And so then I come and hang out with all my friends, we do the hugs, we do the handshakes, all that stuff. I sneeze, I don't know, whatever, and I just spread it to 20 of you. And then that's how this happens.
Now,
so
20
quickly.
of us have it, but we don't know it at all because we don't feel anything for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days. So we go hug our families. But
is it just sneezing? You said earlier there's a reproducing of the cells and you shed.
Yeah, speak into that. That's a very good question, Dave.
It's a fantastic question. Thank you for it. So there was a study that was done recently, And what they did was that they looked at 181 patients who had COVID-19. What they found was that about 79.5% of patients, 97.5% of patients actually developed symptoms within around 11.5 days. But the majority of patients would develop symptoms within 5.1 days. And so if I was to contract COVID-19 right now, my body, the COVID-19 will most likely go through my nose into my respiratory tract. And my body will start replicating this virus. And I might not have symptoms at all.
Your body would be reproducing the bad stuff.
The bad stuff, the virus itself, yeah. So the virus uses my body as a host to replicate this virus. And I might not have any symptoms at all.
Your body is the host that replicates the bad stuff.
Yes, sir.
I call it the bad stuff.
The bad stuff. I'll call it the virus here in this situation. And so I may not have any symptoms. However, as soon as my body starts replicating this virus, my viral load goes up. I will start to shed this virus. And the process of viral shedding means that I'm actually prone to transmit it to other people.
Wait, you're shedding it, which
Correct.
means you're imparting it.
I'm shedding it, meaning that I have the ability to transmit this virus to someone else, even if I do not have symptoms.
So you're hosting it, and you're shedding it, and you're transmitting. All kinds of good things are
Just
happening.
10 seconds. Why do they call that shedding? That's a weird word.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, I think, in microbiology.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'll let it go.
So wait, here's another key point. So when you shed it, and you leave it in the air, you leave it on a doorknob, you leave it on clothes, I think you've said it's a 6-hour kind of sits there.
Yeah.
Time
And
frame?
the 6 feet, the droplets. Like,
Yeah.
mention both of those 6.
Okay, so I'll mention the first thing, which is the magic number of 6 hours. So what we have learned from previous exposure to the SARS virus in Hong Kong is that the SARS virus can live within fabrics, on bed sheets, fabrics of chairs for about 6 hours. And so this is the reason why we do want to, in public areas, be sanitizing these areas of public surfaces and surfaces that many people touch every 4 to 6 hours. And that's where that number comes from.
So the virus lives on its own for 6 hours without
Correct.
a host. But if
Yes.
we wipe it down with the right combination, because you're going to mention that later, the alcohol versus that's why we got to do it every few hours, because it lives for 6.
Exactly, yeah. And so we want to take that extra precaution, especially in public areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this issue of 6 feet, which is the topic of social distancing, if that's okay. So social distancing does not mean emotional or spiritual distancing. Social distancing, what it truly means, it's something that we do to protect ourselves and to protect the community at large. So we want to keep a distance of about 6 feet between each other. Not because we don't like each other, but because we love each other. We want to protect ourselves and the other person. And so most of us, if we sneeze or if we cough, for example, if I cough or if I sneeze, I usually don't cough or sneeze particles more than 6 feet. Well, at least for human beings, most people don't cough more than 6 feet.
The average person.
The average person. And so, and that's where this number of 6 feet comes from.
Because we think you sneeze or something, and you can feel it here, but you're saying invisible, micro level, 6 feet, in a way that nobody could see or discern. It still goes that far.
Exactly,
Is that right?
Yeah, and so when we sneeze or when we cough, we really want to do it into our elbow or into a tissue because it stops that spread. And so because most people, at least most human beings that I know, don't sneeze or cough droplet particles more than 6 feet, 6 feet is a good distance.
There's always that one guy.
Yes, there's always that one guy.
There we go. Good. Actually, in that, let's cut to this. The next thing we're going to really go into is actually what we are doing organizationally.
But before, the social distancing.
Social distancing and hand washing.
Wait, the social distancing is not emotional or relational.
That's good.
It's like one guy is real sensitive to it, and he says, no, I'm serving the community by upholding this. The other guy goes, that's dumb. And so, I'm the guy, let's say I'm the guy who says it's dumb. I go, hey, Joseph, bro. And you run away. I go, what, Joseph, what's going on,
This
man?
is a crazy hypothetical. I can't ever picture you being like this.
Yeah, because I'm the guy that would go hug the guy and go, come on. And you're backing away. And I go, man, Joseph, he's mad at me or something. And you're saying, no, Joseph actually loves me. That's why he's backing away. But if people aren't all in the same conversation, there's a little bit of relational hiccup in this going, well, what's going on here? I thought this community was supposed to be moving closer together,
No, and this really is one of the big ones. So we mentioned that there's several actions we're going to take as an organization.
Like, can we sneak in hand washing?
We will.
We will.
We will. It's one of them, but this is one of the big ones, i.e. one of the ones that will be...
Oh, you said big and little, you did.
Yes. This one will be disruptive. This will have implications on how we do a gathering like this. So
social distancing.
He's saying 6 feet apart, we'll look around. You're sitting next to people. How are we going to do this? So we are going to be talking a lot of how we will still accomplish gatherings while at the same time trying to honor these standards.
So we're talking about the national, what they're saying, the smartest experts, and many of them, not just one little group or one political opinion, that they're saying that they want 3 chairs in between every person in a public gathering. So we're thinking of the GPR, and we're going to uphold that. And just so you know, there's about 500,000 churches in America. They're all having this conversation this weekend. Maybe 10% are blowing it off and going, oh, who cares? But 90% of that 500,000, they are embracing this. Everyone's talking about it, not to mention a couple million businesses or whatever the number really is. And so 3 chairs in between everybody. So in the GPR, there's 700 seats. But if we do 3 chairs and then we're going to mark the seats, and we're starting Monday, by the way, families can sit in those 3 empty chairs. I mean, they can sit together because they live together. But apart from that, we're going to really honor this. And so between the 700 seats in our prayer room and the 15 side rooms, which we can fit 2 to 3 people in that with that distance, we can only get at the absolute most 200 people in the GPR. Well, currently it seats 700, and during this 40-day fast, we have about 10 or 15 meetings that have 300, 400, 500 at the meetings, but the limit is now 200. Then in our gatherings
And
here,
the new legal limit is 250.
yes.
Meaning we were planning for 200 and we accidentally hit the legal limit because we didn't know that was coming.
Yeah, yes.
That just
but
happened
every 3
last service.
chairs, so we have 84 2-hour prayer sets every week. That's what 24/7 is. 84 2-hour worship sets every single week. About 10 to 15 of them have 300 to 500 at them in the context of this 40-day fast. So we have to do something about that.
We need to get below...
To get it to 200. So should I go in more on that right now? Or do you want to give some more and then come back to applications?
Let me keep going and then we'll do
come back
application.
to application. Yeah.
So, but again, this is a very big one. So we are asking you again to embrace this. And what we're going to do to help is we're going to be actually going into the prayer room. We'll give more practical details in a few minutes and actually putting little dots on
markers
on the chairs. Say, here's chairs that are spaced out. Go ahead and sit in those chairs just to help you. But we're asking you to help us to do that. This is going to be disruptive.
By not sitting in the unmarked chairs, unless you're a family member, then you can sit together.
Yeah, but this one will be a very disruptive one for us.
Extremely disruptive.
Just to take it up a level, because again, I want to belabor this point to show us how serious this is. Let's go to the next slide about Philadelphia versus St. Louis. And guys, I'd love to have you talk about this more. Samuel, if you don't mind just taking a couple minutes on this.
Yeah, so this is influenza. This is the Spanish flu back in 1918 to 1919. So this is already 1 century back, but we can see that this specific pandemic infected overall during the course of its lifetime over 500 million people across the globe.
I want to stop. Did you catch that? Some of you know that. Like, I've studied that a little bit, and some of you have. 500 million people in 1918 and 1919 had the flu. 500 million. It was a pandemic like we've never seen before besides the Black Plague in the 1300s. That was kind of equal to it. Those are the two biggies, and I'm sure there's one or two others. 500 million. So we're using that data to compare to what's happening now. Go ahead.
So with relation to this, we see two different curves.
Put that slide back up.
Yep.
Keep going.
With relation to this, we see two different curves. So we see one for Philadelphia and we see one for St. Louis. Now, specifically for St. Louis, these are deaths for every 100,000 people. So for St. Louis, once it heard the news, and once it got its first few infected, it shut down its school system, so people couldn't meet at school buildings, even though
Could not meet.
Yes.
And they're the little dotted ones, right?
Yes. So they could not meet at school buildings. They kept gatherings to a low amount, and they implemented social distancing in its rudimentary form. And Philadelphia, by comparison, when it received its first few cases, it thought that quarantining and isolating those few cases that showed symptoms already was enough. And as it went into season, it actually saw that there were deaths around the holidays, especially during celebrations when many gatherings were happening that they did very little to implement precautions against. And
So they were cautious once the guy was sick and obvious, but they didn't take the social disciplines or the social etiquette, as they said earlier, because they said, well, we look fine. Let's go ahead to the big gathering. And they exploded numerically, whereas St. Louis stayed low on the curve.
Again, we're maybe saying it too many times, but I don't think we can belabor this enough. We need all to buy into this and to own it. So that's social distancing. We'll be talking a lot about that throughout tonight and as well as in the future. This is a new term for you, just like every generation has the new term. Our new term is social distancing.
But the whole nation, many of the earth are talking about this. I mean, millions. It's not a local deal.
You'll hear flattening the curve, social these are new terms that are going to be very normal because of what's happening right now. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And here we go, Dave, you get your sanitizing.
Come on now.
Good. Okay, so the next thing that we're really embracing as a community is sanitizing when entering and leaving the prayer room and other public gatherings. So this is just, we're working to try to make hand sanitizer available, but we really want to encourage you. It's like, well, did I touch anything? Well, just be precautious, as well as absolutely, of course, whenever you go to the restroom, washing with soap and water. By the way, let's just take a minute and talk about the difference between soap and water and hand sanitizer. It's pretty drastic.
So we have two main preventative measures besides social distancing. So social distancing, of course, is the most effective. It means that you don't have the chance, you don't have the risk of actually going into an area where there is potential infection, but or you're far enough away from it. But other than that, we also have alcohol-based solutions, which include hand sanitizer, and we also have soap-based solutions. So hand sanitizer and alcohol-based solutions do well to inhibit many of the functions of a virus, especially those that are on surfaces, those that are on hands, and they've been proven sufficient in that regard. But they don't fully eliminate the cause. They don't fully eliminate the virus. Now, when we talk about soap-based solutions,
So the alcohol cleans a little bit, but the virus does not get removed.
yes.
That's a big point. I didn't know that.
So when we talk about soap-based solutions, viruses in their very fundamental form are containers for their own way to replicate themselves, their own information. And because of this, they need some kind of layer, some kind of wrapping to hold this information. And this happens to be something we call a lipidal layer, or a fat layer. Now, because it's a fat layer, soap does well to remove most lipids. At the large scale, we see dish soap, we see very high concentration soap remove chemicals and remove things that are fat-based, lipidal. So at the microscopic level, soap-based solutions break down the lipidal layer that contain the replicating information of a virus, which is why it destroys the virus at its own layers.
Wash.
If I can
with soap.
now,
Now,
something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and so one of the most commonest questions I get is, when should I use a hand sanitizer and when should I wash my hands?
And how long do you wash?
And
That's
how
a
long
good
do you
question.
wash? Yeah, and so whenever...
That is an excellent question.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah. Back to COVID-19. So if you are using the restroom, if you are preparing food, if you are handling children, I would recommend very strongly that you use soap and water. However, for a very quick sanitization, if you're entering and exiting public areas like the prayer room, it's okay to use hand sanitization. For people who are over the age of 50, it should also be noted that chronic and repetitive use of hand sanitizers that contain alcohol can cause thin skinning. So if you
Say that a little slower.
yeah. So for people,
So people me and Dave's age, our category,
so people who are over the age of 50.
you're getting there,
Yeah.
dude, in a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not there
those
yet.
who have skin conditions, or those who are undergoing the aging process, like most of us, but who are over the age of 50.
Did you say the Asian process or the aging process?
The aging process.
Because I'm undergoing the Asian process, which means post 50 you won't tell.
Chronic or long-term use of hand sanitizers that contain alcohol can cause thin skinning. And so if you are concerned about this because of medical reasons, I would encourage you to use less of the hand sanitizer, but actually wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds, or people should wash their hands with soap and water for 20 seconds. And after you wash your hands, to use a hand moisturizer.
Okay. So let's go on to our next slide. This is another major one that we need to take some time and just really break down. So because of the medical professional guidelines, we are implementing a 14-day quarantine for travelers who are coming from a high-risk region before entering the prayer room and other public gatherings.
So this is the social distancing, which is going to reconfigure our rooms, is radical change 1. This is radical change number 2.
This is a big one.
It's a big one.
Obviously, we don't even have to say the level of disruption. We are a community that travels, that ministers, and this will cause deep waves. We had examples from our last service of key leaders who are going to high-risk areas.
Like on Monday, they've had plans. It's a business deal. They're going to a high-risk area, coming back. The new policy, again, we're just embracing and honoring what the leaders who know this are asking everyone across America to embrace. And we're going, ugh.
Now it got real really fast. It's like, really me? It's like, yeah, you really
This
need
one leader talking to us just this morning says, really? But I'm okay. No, you're going to the high-risk area. And if you do, it is a 14-day quarantine when you come back before coming into the missions base.
And again, let's break down that term, because quarantine, what does that mean? So let's give 10 seconds. What is it? When we say self-quarantine, what are we referring to?
Okay. So really we have two different terms that are moving around, especially on social media, which are isolation and quarantine. So isolation is when you have been confirmed, you've been tested, you have the virus, you have symptoms, or you don't in this specific case. And then you put yourself in a position where you have access to supplies and everything, but you are not actively in an area with people that are not infected.
So that's
You're
isolation.
That's isolation. So you're not
Because
exposing...
you have the virus for sure.
Yeah, you are not exposing other people. Now, quarantine is where you move into an area you may have possibly been exposed, and because of that, you may possibly be infected.
Maybe shedding, is that correct? Are we using the right terms?
Viral shedding.
Are you shedding? Okay.
So that will be when there is enough virus in your system to the point where it can be detected. But really, it's waiting after exposure until the point where we can tell that you either have symptoms, or to the point where it's directly testable.
Because for that 5 to 7, 8 days, you don't have symptoms even though you have the virus. That's the quarantine. If the virus is proven and you're getting sick, that's the isolation. Am I saying that right?
Yes, and for travelers, some people have visitors from out of town, or you know of visitors from out of town, and they're eagerly always coming to visit the prayer room, which we really welcome. But in this season, we really ask you to advise them to choose another season, especially over the next 30 days.
If they're from high risk.
If they are from high risk area, but they can come visit you, and just that in the public meetings, we will actually put up signs for those from a high risk area. We will not encourage them to come into the building. There will be signs in different places. Now, there's a caveat that if you get tested and then you know that the test is negative, then the 14-day quarantine is like you are released from it because you know you don't have it.
So you come back from the high risk. You said, no, the Lord told me to go, whatever, whatever. You come back, you get tested. They go, no, you don't have it. The 14-day thing is not applicable to you at that time.
Yeah, so basically, it's like school. You get to come back with a doctor's note. It's good.
Yes, but you cannot do this. You cannot say, by faith, I know I don't have it. Because I'm a man and a woman of faith, so you must be tested. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. This is our last one that we're going to talk about tonight. Obviously, we're a very loving culture. We like to greet, hug. Mike tries to hug us all the time up here. We are asking, as a community, we need to temporarily change our social greetings, our social greeting etiquette. But we're trying to do so in a way without creating rejection and weirdness. This is what Mike was referencing earlier. So, but what we're doing is we're stating pretty overtly, hey guys, for the next season, we need to avoid handshakes and hugs so that we just clear the air that there's not that expectation, and it helps.
So nobody's rejecting anybody.
It's not rejection.
And the projections are the season. This does not have to be a real long season in our nation, but we're going with the national narrative. We're going to honor what 500,000 other congregations are being called to honor, and the vast majority will honor.
Exactly. And again, just to summarize all these things, these sound like such small things. Really? You're telling me that if I wash my hands, don't touch my face, stay away from you for a bit, stay home if I was in a high-risk area, that's really going to shift things? And from all the research, all the professionals, what we're saying is absolutely.
And it shifts it radically.
Those things, as you saw from that one chart, Philadelphia versus St. Louis, could literally save lives. And we're all about that.
Again, if thousands of people in Kansas City, hundreds of thousands, do this, and lots of leaders, ministry leaders, business leaders, government leaders, academic, military, lots of them are pushing. And if 100,000 are promoting this, do this, it will shift what happens in Kansas City.
Good. So that's that. Those are the two major areas and the two smaller things. So again, we have a social distancing. Again, that's going to be a word that you'll get used to. We have the 14-day quarantine. Those are the two big ones. And then we have hand washing, and we're going to be changing our greeting system. We're still up in the air a little bit of what the official new greeting will be.
But tell us how they do it in Hong Kong, that little foot thing you did earlier. Wuhan, the foot thing.
The people in Wuhan has been on lockdown almost forever now, I mean, for a long time. So when they're on the street, for the brief moment they're allowed to come out, to encourage one another, they use the, not fist bump, but
they foot bump.
Foot bump. The reason is because your...
And could elbow bump do it?
Anything that's upper body is a little bit more...
That's too far.
The reason is because, you know, sometimes we still do this. Okay? Sometimes we still do this. The thing we're trying to avoid is the contacting with the surface that might have the virus, and then we put it around the nasal area, and that is problematic. We're not going to take our feet and put it on our face. That's why the feet bump still work.
Hit? Would that work? There's no sneeze?
You can get really creative there.
Okay,
so,
I'll let it go. I'll let it go.
Yeah. Okay, Dave, you look like you have something.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize again, we're going to do a Q&A in a moment, and there's going to be a ton of questions. I want to just say this. We are in uncharted waters. One of the things that
America is, not just our missions base.
But in the immediate, we're feeling something as a family, and we want to lead well. But you do have to realize, I looked at Mike earlier, I said, Mike, is this our first national crisis as a ministry? And he said,
in my 64 years, we've never seen anything that I remember in my lifetime this. The last time was 1918.
Which means he did go through it, but
I was real young then. I don't remember it. I was too young back then, David.
No, we appreciate your experience in such a trying time. And so the thing to think about it, if something like this hasn't happened in over 100 years,
nobody has a grid for it.
Nobody knows what to do. And so, like, I'm seeing lots of social media rage towards the president as if they would do better if they were the president. Nobody knows what to do. Everyone's doing the best they can according to their expertise. We're doing the best we can according to the grace of God, but the season calls for adaptability, flexibility, and really, you've got to stay in communication with us. You've got to check your emails. You've got to check your communication. Because again, we were doing a presentation like this in our last service, and as we were doing the presentation, all of a sudden, Jackson County changed the dynamics of public gatherings during our meeting.
From 1,000
to 250.
in an hour. We're in our meeting, the 5 o'clock service. It was 1,000 at 4 o'clock, and at 8 o'clock or 7, so whatever time, it was 250 is the limit for a sanctuary gathering. A lot of mega churches in town with 3,000 and 4,000 member sanctuaries. They can only have 250 people in the sanctuary, 3 seats apart, and that's the legal limit. And if they violate it, the mayor, the governor, and the others have the authority to lock the building.
There's an old saying, everybody hates the way things are, but everybody hates change. Here we are, we've been in this divine moment before the Lord. I want you to talk a little more on this. We've been in this divine moment before the Lord. We're leaning in together. And this divine moment that's been going for a number of months, and in this divine moment, I feel like every day is change. I feel like the Lord is accelerating things. Things are changing faster than we like, but it's putting something in us as a people that's better able to flow with how quickly things are accelerating. But talk more about the moment we're in.
Just real brief, 18 months ago, the Lord, the convergence, the homecoming, we have different terms, highlighted, I want you to draw very close together. And this is saying social distance. And so there's many congregations that are saying, you know what we're going to do? We're just not going to meet for 3 or 4 weekends, because many are thinking this is short term. And we can't guarantee that it is, but if America responds right in the natural and the Lord's favor and the spiritual things happen in the spirit realm, you know, we could go on and on about that. But the Lord, we're in attention. We're being called to go close together, yet the government and the policies are saying be distant. And again, many ministries are just saying, let's just take the next 3, 4, 5 weeks and not meet on Sunday morning. Mega ministries are doing that as well as small ones. But we're saying, no, we're in this divine tension with the Lord. We don't want to do that. So we are going to bear this hassle. It would be much easier for a bunch of us, a lot of us in the room and here, just to not have meetings for a month. It'd be, you know, keep the prayer room going. It'd be like, wow, was easy for a month. But no, there's a relational thing we're in a tension with the Lord. We got to keep moving forward and burying the inconvenience and trusting the Lord is short term. That's number one. Number two is that it's not a coincidence that 2 years ago, Lou Engle started calling people around the globe with this 40-day fast, and the beginning of the increase of this virus to where it begins to spike at an international. And what some are projecting near the end is in that 40-day window, the Lord's saying, I've already a step ahead of you, far ahead of you. I've got hundreds of thousands of people in my kingdom on a 40-day fast. When the globe is being threatened by this global assault. And then another thing happening a couple days ago, you know, a large company from here as well as from around the nation was on the Washington, D.C. before the Supreme Court. The 50 years to the day that abortion, that law was being presented, 1970, it wasn't made legal until 73, but presented 50 years to the day, March 3rd, they are lobbying to change the law, and there's really a real opportunity it might. So the abortion issue is in the air, the 40-day fast, the coronavirus, economic pressures beyond measure, civil strife in the political arenas. There's so many things converging, but I am absolutely sure the Lord's saying, I'm way ahead of you. I'm leading this thing. I'm going to make this a kingdom opportunity. I'm going to create an opportunity where many people get touched by me, and I'm going to bring you real close together, even though this season looks like it's opposite. You're in it together, and there's going to be, I believe, a greater longing even of the believers and unbelievers too. But I just really want to come back with a new resolve and a new depth. And I think the Lord, when we look back down the road, we're going to say, Lord, you triumphed over this thing.
Yeah, amen. I couldn't have said that better.
But just to add a little bit more, that the intensity of the context and the challenge at this moment is actually heightening the preciousness of our response to the Lord together. And Mike has highlighted a few things. You know, last few weeks, we were playing Paul Cain's voice about stadium Christianity. And this year, 20 stadiums in America was scheduled to have large gathering. And
It's
this
never happened in history where a nation had 20 kingdom events in large football stadiums in 1 year in one nation. That's unprecedented in history. And this virus wants to stop all of that.
And then you see in even Joseph's slide that a lot of sporting events, last event, are beginning to be postponed or canceled. And I remember in one of Paul Cain's proclamation in this vintage video or the sound, he said there's no sporting event. Sporting event was not happening, but yet stadium was still gathered. We're in a divine moment right now because in Bob Jones' dream, when he saw the Arrowhead Stadium and the Truman Land and the procession down the Blue Ridge Pull-Up, it was about the breaking out of healing. So even though we spend majority of our time in preparation of how do we live together in a sustainable way in corporate prayer and continue to meet, I want all of us to know that we are going for the broke. We are going 100% because we believe the promise of God is at hand. We believe in the power of God breaking out in healing. Perhaps what we intended to do in Arrowhead Stadium was a planned event, but God, through this crisis, is going to create a spontaneous healing breakout in Kansas City that's related to Arrowhead Stadium that we cannot even foresee right now. It's about 8-9 months from here. There's going to be intensity, but that depends on us staying in the gap, staying focused in a believing heart. We are really in the moment of faith right now, even though the last 1 hour we're talking a lot about logistic and practical. Those are necessary wisdom so that the distraction can be removed out of the way so we can stay focused to contend for the fullness of all that God has for us.
I'm alerted, I'm energized, I'm leaning in. I think we're going to be surprised how the Lord's going to turn many things around in the days to come.
And two more small points. It's not just about how we live together. We are very concerned for the well-being of everyone that is connected to you, connected to us. So if there are elderly people in the risk group or the young children with some health complication, we want you to send an email to fc@ihopkc.org. We want you to put their contact on us because we want to put those people on our watch list where we can pray for them. We can call them. We can check on them and see whether they have enough food supply and all this. We want to make sure that if the situation escalates and people are in their house 4 or 5 days, we want to make sure someone knows and they are cared for. The other thing is also the community may also have elderly people, infirms in the Grandview area. We want to take this opportunity to serve the city, after we put our house in order.
We want to serve the city at this time.
Yes.
So we're going to end with this, a couple policy changes I've already hinted at, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So if you got questions, just start getting ready with them. We want to take time and give you a chance to express what you want to know more about. Okay, the GPR, we can only fit 200 in there by having 3 empty seats and then a marked chair, 3 empty seats, a marked chair, and the 15 side rooms, only 2 to 3 in there. So a total is max 200, a little bit less than that. But here's the deal. We're in this 40-day fast together. And so I've called people to come to 2 prayer meetings a day, a certain number, not everybody, but over 300 have responded to come to 2 intercession sets a day. That is so glorious. And many are coming to 1 or 1 every other day, which is glorious. I mean, whatever measure, I appreciate. But these 2 intercession sets a day, 300 have committed to, have caused the room to be full. And so we have 6 a.m., which is intercession, 10 a.m., which is intercession, 4 p.m., which is intercession. From Monday to Friday, those 15 sets, although 2 or 3 of them are not full, and you'll know which ones they are, because if you go to them, you'll know. But those 10 to 15 sets, 2-hour sets, they're too full. And we have to get about 200 less people in the room, because the max is 200, but we have 400 to 500 coming. because a lot have made a commitment to come to those because I asked them to, and they said yes.